In the name of God, who creates, redeems, and who sanctifies. Amen. Amen. Happy June 1st, happy 7th Sunday of Easter, and happy Pride. My memories of Pride are inextricably linked with church, and I think I'm lucky in that. Now, I need to clarify that I was not raised in a church that affirmed LGBTQ+ people, but once I got to college and discovered that there were churches with more open attitudes, things changed for me. I found a spiritual home in the Episcopal Church, first in my campus ministry and then also at the large parish across the street from the university. I don't remember who the first out queer person was who I met at church, but there were enough LGBTQ people at Palmer Memorial Episcopal Church that it could have been any number of folks. There were even several out same-sex couples, which was unusual to me at the time. And now, though, we're so used to diversity here, diversity of households here at Trinity, that I know I sometimes forget that it's not like this everywhere. So back then, over 20 years ago, when I met gay people and gay couples at church, and they were just regular members and as welcome as anyone else, that really meant something to me. At the time, I still struggled with my own queer identity, but having found a more progressive expression of Christian faith and a tangible welcome in a local community of faith, I felt comfortable coming out, first to myself, and then to my friends, my priest, and eventually my family. It was not always an easy path, but at every point, my church community was there for me. And my faith in God's love gave me strength and comfort. And so at age 21, I found myself at my first Pride celebration, standing in front of an Episcopal church, handing out cups of water to marchers, a scene I've repeated many times in many places. Over 20 years after that first Pride, I've now had the privilege to celebrate with my church community wherever I've found myself, from Texas to Georgia to DC to New York, and now here in New Jersey. I was ordained a deacon and a priest as an out gay man, and I was married to my husband in an Episcopal church. And now, as a gay married man, I have the privilege to lead this wonderful church that is the most welcoming, inclusive spiritual space of all the congregations I've been a part of throughout my life. I'm grateful to be your rector, and especially on this occasion of Pride, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be who I am and to thrive as a gay man and a person of faith. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly, there was an earthquake, so violent that the foundations of the prison were shaken, and immediately all the doors were opened, and everyone's chains were unfastened. In today's lesson from the Acts of the Apostles, we hear about how the early church disrupted the social conventions of the day. Paul encounters a young woman who has a spirit of divination. She is enslaved, and her owners are able to exploit her ability at fortune-telling for their own fortune. When Paul exorcises the spirit of divination from the young woman, her exploiters are upset because she can no longer tell fortunes, and so their source of money has dried up. And so they demand that he and Silas be beaten and arrested for disturbing our city and advocating customs that are not lawful for us as Romans to adopt or observe. After their arrest, we read of the miraculous opportunity they have for a prison break. Except they do not walk out of those prison cells. Instead, out of concern for the guard, who will be blamed if they escape, they stay and minister to him, resulting in his baptism and the baptism of his whole household. The guard and his family then care for and feed Paul and Silas, and then the next morning, they are released officially by the magistrates. And Paul, who I think never stepped back from an argument in his life, even got them to apologize. This reading speaks to this day's celebration of pride here at this church and in our community. Pride is about refusing to be imprisoned. Even when society restricts freedoms for LGBTQ+ people, pride demands basic human rights and dignity. And when those are withheld, pride declares that our spirit will always be free. As we reflect on Paul and Silas and their experience in jail, I invite us to think about when those times are that the divine breaks into our lives and seeks to set us free. How will we respond in those moments? Sometimes we need to rush out of those cells and immediately seek sanctuary and safety. And sometimes we might be called to stay in contexts that place restrictions on us, even as we celebrate our inner freedom and advocate for the full liberation for ourselves and for those around us, including those who would seek to keep us down. Because, after all, living as an oppressor is its own oppression. Before the way of Jesus solidified into an institutional religion and eventually replaced the Roman pantheon of gods as the imperial faith a few centuries after the resurrection, the early disciples were part of a countercultural movement. They challenged the ways of the world at that time, making no distinction between Jew or Gentile, slave and free, male and female. Everyone had a place at God's table. The early Christians ministered to the powerless and the powerful alike, and both the enslaved and the Roman soldiers found a new freedom in this faith in a Lord who ruled by love instead of domination, who ruled by vulnerability instead of overwhelming might. As Christianity became enmeshed with the power structure of the Roman Empire, it's true it lost a great deal of its subversiveness, although some of its values were absorbed by society. Fast forward almost 2,000 years later and across an ocean, and here in the United States, in the late 20th century and early 21st century, values of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging seemed ascendant in our culture. The progressive church and the LGBTQ+ movement were at the center of the conversation. But things have changed. Not irrevocably, to be sure, but rather than taking for granted that rights and welcome would always continue to expand for more and more freedom, more and more acceptance and embrace, instead, we must now be vigilant. Today, we celebrate Pride in a different context than a year ago. Even as we affirm the beauty of all of God's children in our worship here in this church, our federal government and dozens of state governments have rolled back rights and protections for many in the queer community. Our transgender and non-binary siblings have been particularly singled out by discriminatory policies. But every part of the LGBTQ+ Rainbow Coalition is at risk of losing hard-won progress. And so we must be vigilant. 125 years ago, months before becoming the third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson wrote in a letter to Benjamin Rush, another revolutionary founding father, he said, "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." That is me, Chase Danford, not Thomas Jefferson, I have committed the same oath in my heart. And it is a commitment that I bring to this pulpit and this table every Sunday and every day of my ministry and my life. My faith in the all-embracing love of Christ leads me to say no to every oppressive ideology and policy that would hold captive the minds bodies, and spirits of God's beloved children. My faith in the unconditional love of God leads me to draw the circle ever wider and wider still, to make sure that there are more chairs at the table. Now, I don't always live up to my ideals, but I try. And I know all of you do too. So today, we march. Today, we stand on the church lawn and the festival grounds, and we witness to God's love. Today, we say no to the tyranny of religious fundamentalism and prejudicial cultural values that would seek to oppress people for being who they are. And instead we say yes to freedom. Freedom in heart, mind, body, and soul. We say yes to pride, and by doing that, we say yes to God's unconditional love. Amen.